In a quiet town in Ohio, a dark story unfolds. In 2013, a shocking web of deceit, lust, and betrayal culminates in a horrific double homicide. This is the tragic tale of Martha Caldwell, a 73-year-old woman who, after a lifetime of routine, begins an unexpected affair with two younger men. What began as a secret indulgence turns deadly, leading to one wife's murder, one wife's devastation, and a courtroom trial that would leave the town reeling. Martha Caldwell, a widow of 10 years, lived her days in steady, unremarkable routines. At 73, her life felt defined by a cycle of morning coffee, afternoon errands, and the company of her elderly friends. Her husband, Hank, had passed in the early 2000s, leaving her with a comfortable, if unremarkable, existence. Theirs had been a respectable marriage. He was a local banker. She, a devoted housewife. Martha was well liked, but even she knew that no one could truly call her life exciting. By the 2013, something in Martha had shifted. She was no longer merely a widow, but a restless soul, wondering what life had really offered her. Each day seemed to pass in an unchanging rhythm that suffocated her. She began to notice the silence in her house more sharply, the hollow sense of missed opportunities. One evening, alone and aimlessly browsing the internet, she stumbled upon a site that she had never expected to see. A page filled with passionate scenes of younger people. To her own surprise, Martha found herself captivated. The images stirred something deep inside her that had remained dormant, hidden even, during her marriage. In the following days, curiosity led her back to the site. It was as though a part of her, one she had kept locked away for decades, was awakening. She didn't fully understand her own motivations, but her heart began to beat faster with each visit. The idea of excitement, of indulgence in desires she'd never voiced, filled her thoughts. She began to fantasize. Young men, adventurous connections, a life that was the polar opposite of her own subdued existence. For the first time, she felt like a different woman, one who could still command attraction and stir longing in another person. Just weeks later, Martha decided to join an online social forum. Nervous but fueled by this new, inexplicable energy, she crafted a profile that hinted at her elegance but concealed her true age. Within days, she connected with a young man named Ryan Henderson, who was only 24 years old. Ryan had been married for just under a year to Sophie, his high school sweetheart. But the pressures of early marriage and financial stress weighed heavily on him. He felt trapped in a life that seemed to demand constant responsibility. And Martha's profile, a picture of an elegantly dressed woman with a knowing smile, intrigued him. Their first meeting, set for an inconspicuous March afternoon, took place at a small cafe just outside town. Ryan arrived unsure of what to expect, but was captivated by Martha's grace and sophistication, qualities that seemed to carry an alluring mystery. Martha, for her part, was both nervous and exhilarated. She had carefully dressed that day, choosing subtle yet refined attire, and had practiced keeping her voice light and conversational. The conversation between them flowed easily, with Martha offering the wisdom of her years and Ryan eagerly sharing his frustrations and longing for a change. Both were careful with their words, avoiding anything explicit. Yet there was an undeniable tension beneath their polite conversation. Soon after, Martha met Evan Price. Evan was older than Ryan, 26, and was similarly caught in the frustrations of newly married life. While he deeply loved his wife, Nina, he felt overshadowed by her ambitions. She had a high-powered job that often kept her away from home, leaving him lonely and resentful. Martha's interest and warmth drew Evan in, giving him the kind of attention he craved. Their first meeting was quiet, in a dimly lit corner of a local library. They spoke in low voices, Martha's gentle laughter mingling with Evan's confessions of loneliness and frustration. He had never before met a woman like her, worldly, compassionate, and strikingly beautiful, even in her 70s. The encounters soon grew more frequent. On certain evenings, Martha, Ryan, and Evan would meet together, secluded in a nearby cabin Ryan had borrowed from a friend who spent most of his time out of state. These evenings were thrilling and unsettling. They laughed, talked, and became dangerously vulnerable with each other. Martha could sense that the boundaries were breaking, and both Ryan and Evan seemed to enjoy the thrill of something so hidden, so secretive. Together, they shared a kind of emotional intensity that each felt missing in their ordinary lives. The trio, now deeply involved, pushed each other into bolder, more dangerous encounters. The sense of risk heightened their connection, and each meeting felt like a walk on the edge of a cliff. As March wore on, their encounters deepened. They arranged meetings late at night, away from prying eyes, testing the limits of their relationships. By the end of the month, Martha felt a sense of fulfillment she had never known. She was adored, she was desired, and for the first time in her life, she felt powerful. Ryan and Evan, too, were enthralled by this hidden life, feeling more alive in those moments with Martha than they ever had in their daily routines. But beneath the exhilaration, an underlying tension simmered. The secrecy, the lies, and the thrill could not remain hidden forever. The quiet Ohio suburb they lived in was an unassuming place, but every rendezvous felt like another step closer to exposure. Martha, Ryan, and Evan each sensed that this world they'd created was fragile, but none of them were prepared for the devastation that would come when it finally shattered. In the early June, Sophie Henderson sensed that her marriage to Ryan was changing. What had once felt like a hopeful future was now clouded with tension. Ryan had become distant, his gaze often vacant, and his once dependable nature now seemed unpredictable. Sophie remembered how they'd spent nearly every day together as high school sweethearts, sharing plans for the future, excited to build a life filled with stability and love. But that warmth had turned to something unrecognizable. Ryan started coming home late, his excuses flimsy and half-hearted. His phone, once casually left around, was now guarded, and he seemed to keep Sophie at arm's length, as though their connection was a chore he couldn't bear. On the evening of June 14th, Sophie, determined to uncover the reason behind her husband's behavior, carefully went through his belongings. The moment she unlocked his phone and found a trail of hidden messages, her world shattered. Each message felt like a stab, revealing not just betrayal, but a side of Ryan she didn't recognize. She saw the messages to Martha, the woman who was old enough to be his grandmother, filled with intimacies she had never heard from him. Her body went cold, her mind racing, unable to make sense of what she was seeing. The woman who had nurtured him, loved him, was no longer enough for him. When Ryan came home that night, Sophie couldn't hold back. She confronted him, her hurt spilling out like an uncontrollable flood, her words sharp and filled with the anguish of betrayal. Ryan, cornered and exposed, felt a surge of emotions he couldn't control. In a fit of rage, he struck Sophie, his hand swinging in an instant of blind frustration. The strike was harder than he intended, and when Sophie fell, her head struck the corner of a wooden table, leaving her motionless on the floor. Ryan's anger faded immediately, replaced by horror. He stood there, paralyzed by shock, staring at his wife's still body, the woman he had once loved, now lying in a silent, unnatural pose. Panicked, Ryan set to covering his tracks. He hid any evidence of what had happened, hoping that by some means he could avoid suspicion. He stayed home the next day, putting on a show of normalcy, and even sent messages from Sophie's phone, trying to make it look as if she had simply gone away. He acted as if nothing had changed, going to work and speaking to friends as though everything was intact. But as days passed, the weight of his actions grew heavier. The realization of his impulsive violence haunted him, yet he tried to convince himself that he could somehow escape the consequences. By August, Sophie's disappearance had not gone unnoticed. Her friends and family began to worry, their concern growing by the day. She had always been close to her family, and her absence left them deeply unsettled. Her mother reached out to the police, who quickly opened a missing persons case. Detective Laura Mills, a seasoned investigator known for her perceptive instincts, took charge of the case. Mills, a woman who had seen countless domestic cases, was determined to uncover the truth behind Sophie's disappearance. From her first interactions with Ryan, she noted his unease, the nervous energy that lingered in his eyes as he answered her questions. As Mills dug deeper, she began to notice gaps in Ryan's story. Friends reported seeing Sophie just days before, looking happy, but without a trace of the discord that now seemed to haunt Ryan's life. It wasn't long before Mills stumbled upon a record of messages linking Ryan to a mysterious older woman. A pattern emerged, one that hinted at secret meetings, hotels booked under aliases, and private transactions. It wasn't merely the affair that intrigued Mills. It was the fact that the woman, Martha Caldwell, appeared to have met with Ryan on multiple occasions just before Sophie's disappearance. Curious, Mills expanded her search to include Martha, and the investigation quickly unearthed a string of messages and transactions linking her not only to Ryan, but to another man, Evan Price. The layers of deceit were multiplying, and Mills realized she was dealing with a network of hidden connections that all pointed back to this one mysterious woman. Texts between Martha, Ryan, and Evan, paired with receipts from clandestine meetings, painted a portrait of an affair that had gone beyond mere secrecy. Martha's reputation in the town, once respectable and admired, began to erode as the evidence mounted against her. As word of the affair began to seep out, neighbors and acquaintances watched Martha's life unravel. She was no longer seen as the quiet widow who frequented church events and community gatherings. Instead, she became the subject of scandalous whispers and side glances. Her home, once a place of solace and refuge, felt like a prison as she watched her secret life spiral into public knowledge. Ryan, desperate to keep himself clear of blame, grew increasingly erratic, while Evan, who had once enjoyed the thrill of his involvement, now felt trapped. He began to pull away, sensing that the affair, once exciting and freeing, was becoming something sinister and inescapable. The turning point came when Nina Price, Evan's wife, stumbled upon evidence of his betrayal. She had long suspected that Evan's behavior had changed. His distracted demeanor, the late nights he claimed were for work, and the evasiveness that had crept into his interactions with her. It was on the September 3rd, as she sorted through papers in their home office, that Nina found a receipt for a hotel that Evan had visited without her knowledge. Her suspicions sharpened, she pressed further, and soon uncovered emails and texts between Evan and Martha, messages filled with intimacies that left no room for doubt. Nina's heart broke as she pieced together the story of her husband's affair. She felt betrayed and humiliated, knowing that her marriage had been tainted by deception. After confronting Evan, she filed for divorce, a decision that left him in emotional ruin. She then went to the police, handing over everything she had found, including the texts and receipts. Nina's information was the final puzzle piece. Detective Mills needed to confirm Martha's involvement. As the scandal unraveled, the town became a whirlwind of gossip and shock. Martha's hidden life, her connections to both men, and the fatal consequences of her actions left the community in disbelief. Friends she had known for years now turned away from her, seeing her as a seductress, a woman who had disrupted the lives of two families and possibly caused the death of a young woman. In one cruel sweep, Martha's life of respectability was shattered, her secrets laid bare for all to see. The affair that had once filled Martha, Ryan, and Evan with a sense of thrill and vitality had turned into a web of lies and tragedy. Martha's reputation lay in ruins. Her influence over the two men was fractured, and the once quiet suburb became a town haunted by scandal, betrayal, and the darkest of consequences. By October 2013, the trial of Ryan Henderson and Martha Caldwell had become the most sensational event the small Ohio town had ever witnessed. The courthouse was packed each day, with neighbors, friends, and even strangers from nearby towns, eager to witness the unfolding of a scandal that had shattered lives and left an indelible mark on the community. The town's local paper ran daily updates, each headline adding to the intrigue and horror surrounding the case. Television crews gathered outside the courthouse, their lights and cameras capturing every arrival, every expression, every moment that could further illustrate the strange and tragic tale of lust, betrayal, and murder. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Ryan sat with his defense team, his once carefree expression now hardened, his gaze unfocused. The young man, who had once charmed those around him with his energy, now seemed almost hollow, the weight of his actions evident in his posture. As the trial began, the prosecution laid out their case with relentless precision. Each piece of evidence, from the hidden messages to the testimonies of those who had seen the strain in Ryan and Sophie's marriage, painted a vivid picture of a man consumed by a dangerous passion. The prosecution argued that Martha had entangled Ryan in her web, fueling his desire to the point where he could no longer recognize the life he had once cherished. Martha, seated separately with her own counsel, looked frail and diminished under the courtroom lights. She wore a modest dress, her hair pulled back, and though she maintained a calm exterior, those closest could see the toll the trial was taking on her. She had once been proud of her beauty and grace, but in that sterile courtroom, she was stripped of any semblance of allure, reduced to a figure surrounded by whispers and disdain. Her presence brought out mixed emotions in the townspeople. Some viewed her as a victim of loneliness and desire, while others saw her as a calculating woman who had preyed upon the young and vulnerable. The prosecution did not shy away from depicting her as an accomplice, arguing that she had knowingly manipulated Ryan and Evan, that her desires had led her to cross boundaries few could fathom. Ryan's family sat in silence throughout the proceedings, their faces drawn and pale, unable to reconcile the son they had raised with the man on trial for murder. His mother struggled with disbelief, looking upon her son as if seeing a stranger, while his father's jaw remained clenched, his gaze focused on the floor. Sophie's family attended each day too, their grief raw and unfiltered. They had lost a daughter, a sister, and the courtroom only intensified their agony, as each detail revealed the extent of Ryan's betrayal. Their loss was magnified by the shame of knowing that her life had ended not in an accident, but in an act of violence by the man she had trusted most. The details of the affair between Martha, Ryan, and Evan were laid bare in excruciating detail. The prosecution recounted how they had met in secret, how their relationship had become increasingly reckless. Witnesses spoke of seeing Martha with Ryan in places they should not have been, and evidence from text messages painted a picture of a woman who had abandoned any sense of propriety for the thrill of forbidden connections. Evan, who had been granted immunity in exchange for his testimony, described the twisted dynamics of their relationship. He spoke about the intensity of their encounters, the way Martha had made him feel alive and powerful, only to leave him feeling guilty and trapped. His words added a layer of complexity, revealing how deeply he and Ryan had been affected by the allure and emotional power Martha seemed to hold over them. Throughout the trial, Martha's attorney attempted to present her as a lonely woman who had made mistakes out of desperation rather than malice. The defense emphasized her age, her isolated life, the years of quiet repression that had perhaps driven her to seek comfort in the arms of younger men. They argued that she had never intended to harm anyone, that her actions, however misguided, were not those of a criminal. Yet each piece of evidence presented by the prosecution contradicted this image, painting her instead as a woman who had willingly risked everything for her own desires, disregarding the lives that would ultimately be shattered in the process. As the days wore on, the emotional toll on the community grew heavier. People who had once respected Martha and enjoyed her company now whispered about her in hallways and coffee shops. Ryan's childhood friends, who had once looked up to him, felt the sting of betrayal and confusion. Even Evan, now estranged from his own family, bore the weight of a reputation tainted by scandal. The trial became more than just a legal proceeding. It was a painful unraveling of lives, friendships, and family bonds that would never mend. Just weeks after the trial began, on the November 7th, 2013, the town was struck by yet another shock. Martha Caldwell, who had been awaiting her next court appearance, suffered a heart attack in her cell. She had been under immense stress since her arrest, her health deteriorating rapidly under the weight of public scrutiny and the guilt she struggled to conceal. That morning, prison guards found her collapsed on the floor, her breathing shallow and erratic. Attempts to revive her failed, and by mid-morning, the news of her death had spread through the town. Martha's passing brought a strange mixture of relief and sorrow to those who had followed the case. For some, her death felt like the end of a painful chapter, a closing of a story that had shaken their community to its core. Others felt pity, unable to deny that she had once been a respected woman, a neighbor, a friend. Her fall from grace had been swift and brutal, a stark reminder of how easily one could be consumed by desires left unchecked. Her death left unresolved feelings among those closest to the tragedy. Ryan's family, though still grieving the destruction of their son's life, felt a muted sense of closure. They would never have to witness her defense, never have to endure her presence in the courtroom. Sophie's family, too, felt that perhaps justice had been served in a different way, though it could never bring back their beloved daughter. And Evan, who had hoped for some reconciliation with his own conscience, was left with a void, an emptiness, where he had once looked to Martha for validation and comfort. In the weeks that followed, the town's collective memory of Martha Caldwell grew distant, her image clouded by rumors and lingering distrust. The scandal slowly began to fade from daily conversations, yet her story left a permanent mark, a reminder of how quickly the ordinary can become extraordinary, of how one person's choices can spiral beyond their control, leaving destruction in their wake. And as the year drew to a close, Martha's name became a ghostly whisper in the minds of those who had watched her fall, a lesson in the power of temptation and the fragility of reputation. The aftermath leaves scars on all involved. Ryan serves a life sentence. Evan tries to rebuild his life post-divorce, and the town is left with the haunting memory of the affair that led to murder. Martha's story becomes a cautionary tale about repressed desires, shattered boundaries, and the dark consequences that can arise from secrets kept too long. Do you want to see other insane cases? Like the case where a husband murders his stepson to keep his affair with the babysitter. Secret. This case shows how far people can go to keep their secrets. Check out that case, and don't forget to leave a like and kindly subscribe.